The Seeking Eye Life Exploration podcast is and will always be free to access. But if you would like to support my work, please consider joining my Patreon or signing up on YouTube as a channel member. By doing so, you will receive exclusive benefits, including early access to future podcast episodes, access to hosted discussion groups, and access to non-podcast supplementary videos. So click the join button underneath this video to join as a YouTube channel member, or find the link to my Patreon page in the description. Thank you.
And religion has its upside and its downside. There's some very positive things about religion. It creates community, it creates context, it gives meaning, it has done good work. But there's a huge downside to religion too. And the downside, at its worst, is us against them in violent ways. And then from that extreme, there's just the capacity for utilizing power for oppression. And that's what happened in the United States during slavery. Who supported slavery? Who gave it justification to enslave people? It was the church. Who gave the justification to keep women down? It was the church. And so in real world ways, the power of the church has frequently been misused and abused to the detriment of society in general, but for the benefit of those who are in power in the church. And it's the way it's been. There's been good work done too. I mean, it was the church that brought about abolition. So it was the church that helped women's rights. It was the black church that helped with the end of oppression during the 1960s. That's what that whole thing was rooted in the church. So it has very positive and very negative. The problem really becomes when it's used for the benefit of the few and the oppression of the many.
Indeed, and that seems to kind of take root in a lot of human constructs, like religion, like government, like any kind of power system, is unfortunately those at the very top of these institutions seem to be the selfish type, which I suppose you have to be to reach that level of power. And it's, the people that work for that party or for that religion are likely doing it for the right reasons, but it's those in power that really have the final say and judge which way the benefits go. And I imagine that's the same with the church over the past thousands and thousands of years, just as a part of human nature, and those who seem to be able to sustain power.
Especially when those in power make bedfellows with those in power in church. When politics and religion become a matched pair, as happened in most of the monarchies in Europe, their power was based in the church. And that's a destructive thing for everyone who's not in that church.
Yes, and that was one of the primary drivers, I suppose, to the separation of church and state in government, politics, and in powers.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
So, how would you compare religion as an institution versus kind of individual religion and the religiosity of people?
Well, if we're talking about Christianity, the overarching problem, as I see it, is that the disciples, after Jesus' death, deified him. And when they deified him, they took away his fundamental teaching, which is in the Gospels, in the canon, but also outside the canon in the Gospels that were repressed by the church in the centuries that followed, that he was teaching oneness of being. You are the light of the world. Make your eye single and your body will be filled with light. My burden is light itself. My burden is light. All these teachings that he was giving about the individual human being being a true human child of the divine inside them, when that becomes a power outside themselves, when it's placed in what the Christians call the salvific atonement, the blood of the lamb, then the power becomes condensed into the hands of a few. And then there becomes people who are on the inside and people who are on the outside. And it's not just Christianity. That whole inside outside thing, you can look around the world and see it in every religion there is. The funny thing about Islam is that when Islam rose, when they were in control of Jerusalem, and also when the Moors were in Spain, they were pretty liberal in allowing Christians to be Christians and Jews to be Jews. It was a lot of the Christians who were like, you can't be Jewish. No, you can't be Islam. You can't be Muslim. It was, and then of course, the Muslims got tired of that. And they, if you read the history of Jerusalem over centuries in the Crusades, you see that the Muslims were like, yeah, it's cool. You can be Christian, and we're going to take this land. I mean, they weren't, they were still taking the castle, but they were letting people be themselves, and that kind of went away. And so we have these international conflicts that, even if they're not based in religion exactly, they are based in religion. If you dig a little deeper, East versus West, the Arab states versus Israel, all that stuff, it's all tied in religion.
Indeed. And interestingly, just to kind of pick up on that, or first of all, just to define, to deify, that means to look at Jesus, for example, as
God,
someone to worship, as opposed to a teacher of a philosophy.
Yeah, he was teaching, but I don't think he was teaching a philosophy, because he wasn't teaching. What he was teaching was the divine energy. I mean, he was a presence. You see this in all the iconography, especially the early iconography. Everybody's got a halo. Jesus got a halo made of gold, and it was the people in power who were spending the money on the gold to make that thing happen. But they're beautiful. But everybody's got a halo. He was an energy person. He carried divine energy, and that prana, that chi, that Holy Spirit, the life force energy, whatever you want to call it, that's what he was actually teaching. And if you look at the Gospel of Mark, I read this guy called Adyushanti, who's a Buddhist. I read his book about the Gospel of Mark. And in the Gospel of Mark, it becomes very clear that Jesus was on a journey. He was on a journey of awakening, but he's also on a journey of teaching. And when he first began, he was trying to teach. He was using miracles, and then pretty soon everybody wanted miracles. And then he started teaching, and he couldn't say what he's trying to teach. That's why he taught in parables. They're like koans. Their parables are designed to break the mind, because what he was really teaching was the non-attachment of self to identity, to egoic self structure. And when that failed, I'll show them that death isn't real. I'll die and come back. And then once that happened, they're like, oh, he must be a god. But really what he was teaching, that no, you are too. One of the
I'm just an example of what you can do, what you can be, or what you are, even.
Which is what he told
us. You don't
us.
know that yet.
Yeah, he's like, you can do greater works than I did. Of course, nobody's done greater works, because they've all put the power in his hands. And so they set it up so that you couldn't even do it. You can't be like Jesus. But there are positive things that come out of the church too. It's not all negativity. There's all the mystics, all the teachings about love, all the teachings about sharing with your neighbor, feeding the poor, clothing the naked, heating the cold, welcoming the stranger. Those are all biblical. The Good Samaritan, who was neighbor to the man who fell by the wayside, who was a member of the clan of your enemy. It was the one who showed him kindness, and it wasn't the one you thought it was going to be. It wasn't the Jewish person of Jesus's community. It was somebody outside Jesus's community. He's a brilliant teacher. If people would actually pay attention to strip away all the baloney that's been laid over through doctrine and dogma and theological interpretation, you'd see the man who was trying to figure it out himself, and who actually carried the light within him.
And indeed, at the very core of all the world's religions, it seems that those key teachings from the teacher that began the religions all seem to be the same thing, at least at their very core.
They overlap for sure.
Yeah, indeed. So what do you think of, because I've now, since we spoke last time, I've read or listened to on audio version the Gospels, or at least most of them, and there's a lot in there that I really struggle with just to rationally looking at things, because as you know, I'm a very rational kind of thinker, and from reading it, you would come to the conclusion that Jesus is indeed saying that I am God and only through me can you attain whatever. And looking at it from someone who hasn't had the experiences that you've had, and I imagine the general population would be the same, reading that and then being told by the church that you should follow the Bible pretty much exactly as it says, it gets confusing. Even things like the miracles, turning water into wine, things that are physically impossible for me to believe, and a physical resurrection also is a struggle for me. I can understand a spiritual one because then we're talking metaphysics. Anything's possible there. But in terms of a physical resurrection, turning water into wine, healing lame people, doing all these amazing things, I can't believe. Just through my experience of life, it seems very difficult. So what do you think of that in terms of how one should approach the teachings in the Bible, or the claims, I suppose, in the Bible?
Those are very big questions, and they're important to ask and important to answer. The first thing is that all of the Gospels are named for individuals, but none of those individuals wrote those Gospels. They were all written in the context of communities that developed post Jesus' death, and they weren't really in communication that well because of the distances, and it wasn't the mail system. So the mail system was just developing at that point of history in the West.
Mail is in letters, not
right.
Male, female.
Right,
yeah.
right. Letters, which is why Paul utilized letters. That was a brand new technology. So most of these communities took John moved to some town somewhere and he started teaching, and Mark went somewhere else, and Luke went somewhere else, and Thomas went to India, and Mary was out teaching, and they squashed her down. And in each one of these places, a little community developed so it wasn't just the Jesus, it was the person who was telling the story and their interpretation. And then schools of thought developed. And then the gospel was written not by the author as attributed, but by another person in the school of thought. And in addition to that, there's a collection of gospels called the Peshitta in what's broadly called the Levant, which includes Syria and countries like that. In the Syriac churches, they use an Aramaic gospels, and that Jesus spoke Aramaic. There is argument among scholars: did the first gospels get written in Aramaic and then translated into Greek? Do they, or vice versa? It sounds like, and there's hard to prove this, but the Syriac churches say Jesus spoke Aramaic. We've been using the Aramaic texts of his gospels since they began, and then they got translated into Greek. And when it gets translated, Aramaic as a language has an entirely different concept of time. Time is kind of like the past is in front of you. It's a very different way of, and that's built into the language, and the language itself is more mystical. And when it gets into the Greek is much more dualistic. And so it becomes very more black and white in the Greek. And then it gets translated into English, and everybody who translates it interprets it for their own well-being, from their own point of view. And you don't even get the word homosexual in the Bible until this past century. It wasn't there. Not there, not in the Greek, not in the Hebrew. And so all of that stuff gets piled on as humanity misinterprets the original problem, which was that when they deified Jesus. And in the Gospels, the I am statements: I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody gets to the Father but through me. I am the light of the world. I am, I am, I am. In the Hebrew scriptures, God appears to Abraham, and who are you? I think it's Abraham. Could be Moses. I have to double check that. I think it's Abraham. I am who I am is the quote. I am who I am. The I am itself isn't Jesus. He has all these I am statements. He's talking about what certain parts of Christianity call Christ consciousness. He's talking about his higher self. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody gets to the Father but through me. I am the narrow gate. The I am itself, the light itself is the narrow gate. The way into the light is through the light. The way into the I am is through the I am. And Jesus understood that he was just a vehicle for that. And I and I think that becomes much clearer in the Gospel of Thomas, and is emphasized in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, touched upon in the Gospel of Philip, all of which were suppressed. But when I went to Catholic high school, and so I read a gospel a year through high school. I got to know Jesus from the Catholic point of view. It's also raised Greek Orthodox, so I had this mixed upbringing. But because I read the Gospels in Catholic school, I learned about Jesus. When I was in my senior year of high school, I took a triple hit of LSD. It was the first time I'd ever done that, taken LSD. I had reasons for taking it. I took a heroic dose, and that evening I had an experience of every single molecule around me, physical matter, speaking in a singular voice, saying, I am the I am, and it included every molecule of me. That experience, that end of duality experience, was transformative for me. And but when I had my near-death experience, that experience of the I am inside of all things, which is still true, paled in comparison to what happened to me when I died. It became so much less. It became a preparation for this much larger experience. And when I came back from that NDE, when I picked up the Gospels and read them again, Jesus wasn't who he was when I was in high school. Jesus had transformed, and who he became for me was a lot like me. I was like, oh, he's saying stuff that I understand. I am the light of the world. The light's freaking living inside of me. The light is
an understanding that comes experientially.
Yes, and it wasn't belief. And there have always been people in the church who have mystical experiences, who are on the edges of the church, who have similar experiences as me, as Jesus. And but you mentioned the selfish types that rise to power. The attachment to the egoic self is the thing that Jesus was teaching not to do. And that's selfish people impose their selfishness when they gain power. That's just what happens. And
they do so very successfully, which is, I suppose, just the nature of it's business, really, at the end of the day, isn't it? The stronger survives and gets to the top.
That's business, and the Bible is included. The Bible isn't this monolithic book. You asked a question about the Bible. The Bible is not a monolithic book. The Bible is a sectionalized collection. It's an anthology written by lots of different people over a long period of time, in different contexts and cultures, in different languages. And in those contexts, the language doesn't always mean the same thing as it did 300 years ago when someone else was using the same word. The book of Genesis, for instance, if you take a literal reading of the book of Genesis, you discover immediately that chapter 1 is one creation story and chapter 2 is a second creation story, and they don't jibe. They're not the same. They don't mean the same thing. But theologians have smushed them all together so that it becomes this monolithic story, which it's not even in the Bible. I saw this chart once, and you can Google it online. I don't have it. I could probably find it. It's the chart of the opposites, the contradictions in the Bible. And so it's all of these like verses down here, and then it's got all these arcs, and there's like thousands of them. These colored arcs that, this verse here contradicts this verse. So the people who tell us that the Bible is literally true, they're, I don't know, willful ignorance. It's not. It never has been.
I think to believe it to be literally true would go against every ounce of kind of logical ability that anybody has, because, as you say, there are just outright logical contradictions that just can't work together. And I struggle to see how those who do believe it, and they seem to believe it so passionately, And genuinely, you wonder how can that be such? How can that be such?
Oh, I have an answer for that. That's because it becomes their identity. When part of what happens in a cultural community, which cultural communities, like we're going back to tribalism. So back when human beings, hominids, were first stomping around on the ground out of the trees, we had family groups and those family groups grew into tribal groups, and those tribal groups were defensive for their culture and their resources. That same thing, that tribal group think, it passes down through history. And so when you come to a modern literalist community, it intentionally excludes everything outside of it, which is everything outside the Bible, because here's what happens. If Genesis is not true, if it's not literal truth, we got these two stories, it's not. But if that's true, that it's not literally true, then the whole belief system in Jesus collapses, because people believe in Jesus, they don't experience Jesus. They make an intellectual assent to an idea, and then they keep it in this closed thinking system. They bring in systematic scientific thinking in this closed loop, which is why you get the Bible Museum, because they use logic, but the logic is limited logic because it's only this information. It doesn't bring in anything else. And so that forms an identity in the believer. And if that shatters, then their whole self shatters. So we saw this in Nazism. People who believed in the Nazi movement so strongly that they went against their own morals to keep it intact, because of the groupthink, but because if they stop believing in it, they lose their own identity, and what they believe in, it shatters, and they become, well, not a member of themselves anymore.
Yeah, it's a very difficult way to be, for sure, which is understandable, certainly, but again, it isn't productive to ourselves at the end of the day, either as a species and as a community, to be caught in those loops.
No, it's not. And I have a silent prayer to the heavens, which is, we know that we're not alone. It comes all the way back to believing that human beings were the center in Genesis, the center of all creation. We are the best. We're the best. We're the center of the apple of God's eye. And I give you the mythology. I give you all dominion over everything. You can wreck anything you want because I love you most of all. I don't care if you beat up on your sisters and your brothers and you burn the house down. I love you. And you destroy your habitat. That whole idea of, the whole heliocentric,
yeah, I know what you mean. The
geocentric universe, galaxy, and the bubble above, and then the heliocentric thing, condemned because you're not believing the doctrine anymore. And now we know, James Webb's telescope, we're finding exoplanets by the dozens all the time.
Yeah.
It becomes a cult. There's no prison greater than the prison of your own mind. And what I'm hoping is, and this is just my hope, my prayer to the heavens, is that some of these other civilizations and other star systems make themselves known to us sooner than later, because when that happens, that's going to shatter all of this.
For sure. And there was something in the news, wasn't there, recently about a potential UFO sighting, which is probably some kind of distraction from other political things going on, but interesting nonetheless. The headline was potential object in space is most likely to be an alien visitor coming to destroy Earth or something like that. It's the sensationalistic stuff.
Sure, but
interesting anyway.
But that's not what the Harvard professor was saying, who they based this on.
No, of course.
He's saying that object, which some astronomers think is a comet, but he's saying its trajectory along our course of planets, its near pass through a whole series of planets, is statistically, astronomically unbelievable. Like it's like a point, I don't know what the number is, but I'm going to say a fake number of 0.005% possible that would ever happen, because as everybody has this idea that the planets are circling the sun. That's really not what's happening. The sun is traveling along the edge of our galaxy, pulling along all of these planets and these helixes behind it. And so our orbit is based in, if you look at it from the side view. So this object that's coming in, it's pretty mathematically difficult to do what it's about to do. That's what they're talking about. But there are UFO sightings all the time. There are UAP sightings regularly.
Oh, for sure. And visitations. I mean, a good friend of mine, Lindy, has reported to me, that when she was young, she used to have alien extraterrestrial sightings. And I think my thinking on this sort of thing is if these sightings are genuine, and I'm not saying they're not, I'm not saying they are, but if they are, then I'm more akin to believe that this is more of an extra dimensional travel as opposed to a spatial travel, because the size of unless they've managed to utilize some kind of quantum entanglement technology or wormholes or something, the distances are too great. You'd have to leave hundreds of millions of years ago in order to reach us with the distances. So I'm thinking that it's more an interdimensional thing, which would lead me to further believe that this is more of a spiritual thing as opposed to an as opposed to like an alien as we currently understand them to be. Similar to paranormal, apparitions and things, probably of the same caliber if they are genuine phenomena.
Multidimensionality. So did you see the movie Interstellar?
No.
I highly recommend this movie because of what we're talking about right now. At the very end of the movie, there's I don't want to ruin it for you, but there's a multidimensionality that enables the astronaut to return home because of subspace, of a fifth dimensional. And that's what we see, the same kind of subspace in Star Wars and in warp drives and warp fields. And, NASA's been working on warp fields. It's theoretically possible. Multidimensionality. It's distances are next door if there's no 3D.
Yes, indeed.
Right? So that is very possible. We won't really know what they are till they show up. We can speculate and guess,
and I'd like to see them turn up, because I believe they would be more benevolent than malevolent, because I see no real reason as to why they would be malevolent. But there's plenty of reports of those that have come to kind of assist or support or teach as opposed to destroy. So I think it would be very interesting to see one of these visitations confirmed. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you there, because there is confirmation, and that came out of the United States Pentagon through the Navy back in 2017. They have video footage that they released from two F something fighters, right? So
just the Tic Tac,
the Tic Tacs, right? And well, they're real, and I think that you're right, though. I mean, if they had it in for us, they already would have done us in.
Easy. Very easily, if they're as advanced as to be able to even travel to us in the first place, you'd have thought. Yeah. So do you think that they're probably more of a spiritual nature as opposed to an extraterrestrial?
I don't know the answer to that. Well, I tend not to. I'm also a very logical, analytical person, and despite my work and because of my near-death experience in metaphysics, what hasn't been shown yet, I don't speculate on. I don't know what they are. I have seen them. I chased one once with 4 other guys in a car for miles, and I've seen 2 in the past 5 years. There's a documentary coming out with a bunch of us near-death experiencers. There appears to be an overlap of near-death experiencers and UFO experiencers, and there's a documentary film coming out sometime in this month or next month. That's the plan anyway. And astrophysicists also. There's science involved. But I don't speculate on what I don't know. I might have a hypothesis, but I don't speculate. So I'm not so sure, saying all of that stuff, I'm not so sure that there's a difference between, I think that there's many dimensions. I saw many universes when I died. I think that there's many dimensions that are beyond us. The dead come to visit the living. It happens all the time after someone you love dies, and then your grief transforms as a physical effect on a person when they get this visitation. We can't prove this, But from if you take the science of epidemiology, which is like this collection of data and analysis, you get 50 kids in a circle and they all have this one kind of cancer. Well, you know that something's going on, even if you can't prove it. So you get all these people with these after-death visitations and all these people with near-death experiences, and truth can arise even if the evidence for it is an accumulation of evidence rather than something direct. And
right, yeah. What's the term? Inference.
Inference. We can infer, right? So are they spiritual beings or are they physical beings? The last craft I saw was kind of in between. It was like this, and I got video. It was in my back. I was in my backyard. My buddy shot a video of it. It was this orb that was way high up. But when we zoomed in, it had an Apple phone. When you zoom in on it, it's like no physical structure to it. It's like this pulsing light, but it was traveling in this straight line against a 40-knot wind that was coming out of the east. And it was, it looks cylinder, like a sphere, a solid sphere to the naked eye. But when you zoomed in on it, it wasn't. It was some kind of pulsing light. I've also seen solid ones. I was on Cape Cod a few years ago with my brother in his convertible going to our parents' house, going by the Hyannis airport, and it flew right over us, like just above treetop. And it wasn't a jet. It was like putting along like a walker. It was like going super slow, and it was triangular shaped, black with big lights underneath it. And it was no jet, had no visible means of propulsion, absolutely silent, moving at a speed for its size that's impossible, quote unquote impossible. And then the first time I saw, when I was just out of high school, and I won't tell you the whole story, but it was gigantic. It was solid. It was silent, and it made a right angle turn. It stayed perfectly still. It made a right angle turn I was doing like 90, and it made a right angle turn in front of me. And when we finally turned around and caught up with it, it was sitting still again. And then when it shot out of the atmosphere, it went so fast it left a streak of light. Like the light was like you could see
delayed.
it. Yeah. It was like, whoa. So I think we have to. The jury's still out on it. We don't really know yet, but they're people are seeing them. Everybody's got a phone. Everybody's got a camera. People are videotaping these things now, and some people are faking them. There are definitely fakes out there.
Oh, of course. Well, there will be for any phenomena that we see. So I suppose moving slightly away, because it's interesting, that would be kind of a whole other topic of conversation in itself, UFOs and extraterrestrials and things. But I suppose moving back for now to the Bible and the religious questions, we mentioned the Gospels versus kind of the suppressed Gospels, which I've also read, Thomas and Mary Magdalene.
Cool.
And there are vast differences in the teachings, but most scholars, most theologists, and most general believers in Christianity believe them strongly to be kind of fraudulent, too recent, and non-legitimate for an accurate perception of what Jesus said. What do you think about that? Why do you think they were suppressed? Do you think they were suppressed? Why? And do you consider them legitimate?
They were definitely suppressed. There's evidence that shows that they were suppressed during the rise of the consolidation of the church in Greece. Monks took the books and spirited them away to Egypt to hide them. We know that. And as for their late writing, the Gospel of John was written 100 years after Jesus died. 100 years, a century. Mary, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, was likely written 40 years after, 50 years after. Thomas, I'm not 100% sure of the date on it, but it's been a reasonable amount of time from his death in comparison to the other Gospels. I'd have to look it up.
That's interesting, because I've seen the exact opposite argued, that the lost Gospels were written much more recently than the traditional Gospels.
If you put them all in a collection and you call them all the lost Gospels, it's easy to bunch them all into one thing, because you get the infancy Gospel of Jesus, you get the Acts of Paul, and what the heck is her name? There's a whole lot of these books, and it's easy if you group them all and you do an average. Well, yeah, a lot of them were written later, but not all of them. Not all of them. And if you are going to discredit something, wouldn't you make it bad? It's so like this is what happened to Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene in the canonical gospels, she's not a prostitute. She's likely Martha's sister, who brother to Lazarus, who died. Brother Lazarus, it's likely that's who she is. And there's strong arguments for and against that, but I'm in the camp of for that because I think the arguments are stronger. But she's not a prostitute. She's actually a pretty wealthy woman. Well, if she's a wealthy woman, she must be a prostitute, which is what Gregory the Great said when he imposed this on her. What better way to discredit her gospel, and all women if one of the leading women is a prostitute who's got 7 demons? She was totally put down, absolutely put down. And a lot of people haven't read the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Mary because they're rather recently discovered. Scholars
were they part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, or is that something different?
No, that's something different. Thomas was Nag Hammadi Tel, which was a tel is a mound, and the book was in a jar, hidden on purpose. Also, a codex. It's called a codex. A corollary codex was discovered in Egypt in the 1890s of the Gospel of Thomas. They differ very little, but they're almost completely complete. The Gospel of Mary came from 2 different locations, and they are both missing the exact same parts, which is pretty statistically weird.
Indeed. Yeah. So the claim being that they were taken, separated, and placed in 2 separate locations to prevent them from being discovered.
One could postulate that. But the funny thing about Mary is the Gospel of Mary is that the same parts are missing in both codexes. Like somebody came along with a pair of scissors and cut out the middle of it at the same line. That's
very specific.
It's very specific. That's an unusual. Nobody has an explanation for that. Everybody's like, well, that's weird. And the Gospel of Thomas, in the Gospel of Thomas, you can actually see, if you read the Gospel of Thomas and then reread the sayings of Jesus, the red letter sayings of Jesus, as they call them, or the sayings that are most likely actually attributed to him and weren't put in his mouth by what they're called redactors, the writers the translators and the schools of thought. If you just read the pared down, Jesus is pretty much a oneness teacher in the canonical Gospels. It's just that it's so buried deep by the bullshit that's covering over it. And if you read the Gospel of Thomas and then use that as a lens to see the Gospels, the John, Mark, Luke, and Matthew, you have a different point of view of what Jesus is actually doing and saying. At least that was my experience.
Indeed. So if one were to buy themselves a King James Bible, for instance, which I think is the main one over here, read the Gospels, how different do you think that the written Gospels are to the events that actually took place?
There's a lot of mythology. So scholarship includes theological scholarship includes knowledge of the language of the time, the Greek, Koine Greek, and the mythologies around that region at that time and preceding it. And so if you lay out the 4 Gospels, they were written, Mark earliest, Matthew and Luke, and then John in that order, more or less. And Luke and Matthew seem to have this source called Q, meaning quell, and they both seem to draw from that one particular source. But you can see a progression of the development of Jesus's divinity. In the Gospel of Mark, which has 2 endings, by the way, someone added a second ending on it. It ends. There's a second ending. I think it's the very last, might be the last few verses, like maybe 12 verses or so. But there's no miracle birth story in Mark. That miracle birth story that comes later. And there's no, the Gospel of Mark does not end with his showing up in the original ending. It ends with his well, it does end with him meeting Mary, but there's no additional stories after that. And in that arc-way, the arc of that gospel, Jesus is pretty ordinary person with this mystical life. But then you get to the birth narratives in Mark and Luke and Matthew, the three kings coming, and the development of all of this. And by the time you get to John, you've got him as a transcendent being, which I think is true. I think John's not wrong. But his pre-birth is miraculous in John. In Matthew and Luke, his birth is miraculous, but his pre-birth in John. And so there's definitely a development of the theology as the books were written, even though these schools of thought were separate from each other. They weren't completely out of communication. They just were, you get a school like Chicago, University of Chicago, and a school like UCLA. They're doing different things. They get, or you go further afield, you get the University of Tokyo versus the University of Boston University. Languages are different, cultural contexts are different. They're doing different things. They're not out of touch completely. By the time Constantine arose, and he needed for his own power to consolidate Christianity for the betterment of the empire, he gathered together a bunch of these people so they would get together on occasion, and they kicked out a bunch. The Council of Constantinople was not the first council. That's the council where they developed the Bible, the canon. But they kicked out a bunch of people. That's why the Syrians, they kind of separated over time because they were using this Aramaic I almost said technology. Language is technology. And then there was a whole bunch of them that they kicked out who went to the East. The storied history of Christianity is not known. It's repressed because the victors don't tell the story of the losers.
Another area that I really struggle with, and that I'm sure many do, are the miracles that take place. As you mentioned, the virgin birth, the revival of Lazarus, the physical resurrection and appearance of Jesus, turning water into wine, healing the sick, etc., just through a touch. I can't rectify those in my mind. What do you think? What do you think about them? I suppose. Do you believe them to be events that took place, or do you believe them to be kind of more fabricated or more? I suppose fabricated. What do you think?
There are 10 to 20 million near-death experiencers in the United States alone. We've all come back to life. Lazarus coming back to life. The whole 3-day thing, he's been in the tomb for 3 days. That's a long time to be dead. But Mark Twain once wrote, "Never ruin a good story with the truth." And so I think that there's a lot of building up of the mythology of Jesus to support their guy. Did Jesus walk on water? I don't. Maybe he was superpower, multidimensionality, and had access to a higher dimension that we don't have access to, and maybe he could walk on water. But for him, then it wouldn't be a miracle; it'd be normal. Maybe he changed water into wine. Maybe that's like alchemy. I mean, the closest we've come to alchemy was like a week ago with the fusion, the development of fusion technology of changing one element into something else. Right. So that there's something about gold last week I read about in one of these reactors, science, not magic. But, the alchemy of turning water into wine, I don't need that. I mean, that's all these miracles in the Gospel of Mark. Jesus performs all these miracles, and then he realizes that that's not working, helping get his message across. So he stops doing them because so even Jesus was like, these don't work. Why are people believing in these miracles? Because they want the magic. People believe in miracles now. Like there's a whole movement in New Ageism where if you imagine it, you can make it. This whole manifestation thing. This has roots in this. I've never seen anybody manifest anything. Well, that's not true. I've seen people manifest companies. They get an idea. They make a business plan. They get investors. They make this thing happen. It all came out of their head. I've seen children manifest the their ability to kick a soccer ball because they practice. I've seen that all the time. If manifestation is the way it has a reality in the way that people say that it does, then everybody would be rich. And that's just not the case. So did Jesus? I don't know, but I don't really care. And maybe that's a cop out for some people, but it's not important to me. It's not important to me whether he did it or he didn't. I'm not a believer, for one thing. So I don't need to believe in the miracles to believe in Jesus. I don't believe in Jesus. I don't believe in Jesus. I'm not a believer in religion. I died. God's reality for me, and it's not at all what they're talking about in the world for 90% of it. As for Lazarus, lots of people come back from the dead nowadays. He's not the only one. There are like 5, if you include Jesus, there are 6 near-death experiences in the Bible, if I got my number right. And as for the resurrection, I don't need to believe in a physical resurrection. I mean, the gospel, Thomas sticking his finger in the hole, that's so that people can, feel my rib, put your finger in my hole here in my palm. First of all, it's unlikely that he got crucified in his palm, because the science of nailing somebody to a cross without tying them on at the elbows by putting a hole through their hand, it would rip apart. Much more likely through the wrist, if that's what happened. But secondarily or additionally, if you're going to build a religion, you need your guy to have flesh and bones. And people come back from the dead all the time. 60% of science, this is science, from the University of Washington neuropsychology department. This science is a couple of years old. 60% of people who grieve have after-death visitations. We don't talk about them. Somebody comes back, your beloved, your sister, your dad, your lover comes back and non-linguistically, non-verbally communicates love and beauty to you, or healing, and then your grief changes. So there's a physical result of this. Do I need Jesus to be resurrected bodily? I don't. It doesn't matter to me. I think that's all of the fluff that was built around the religion in order to support their guy.
So at its core, likely a lot of these miracles are experiences that people had, which have then been fabricated upon to give Jesus that deity appearance. So maybe Lazarus had a near-death experience, returned, and whoever then translated or pushed the narrative forward, I suppose, would have said, right, well, Jesus, therefore we could use that as a way we can say, right, Jesus said now he should be awake, and he woke up at that exact moment in time, just as a way of kind of pushing the narrative that Jesus was God, even though it may not be the exact...
Yeah, he might have been instrumental in calling back the soul. But so there might be something to that. But as for the whole story of him calming the seas and walking on water, is very metaphorical. It's very mythological. It's symbolic. Jesus walks up to the edge of the boat. He calms the storm. No, that's a different story. He's in the boat. He calms the storm. In this story, he's walking from the shore along. They see, he's like, "Is it a ghost? It is a ghost. There's somebody bright white out there, luminous." And they see it's Jesus. And Peter's like, "Hey, if this is for real, let me walk on water with you." And Jesus reaches his hand and kind of gives him the Shakti, gives him the life force energy. And Peter gets out, and then Peter gets scared and he sinks. And like, you don't have enough faith. It's a story of energy sharing, it's a thing near-death experiencers experience. I can't prove it to you, but it's something that happens to us on a regular basis. And it's in all the global religions. They call it Shakti in Hinduism, Shaktipat, transfer of divine energy. You shoot your chi out of yourself and knock a guy down. Did Jesus have to walk on water? No, but it really gets the message across that you can rely on this fellow for the divine energy and gain from him, and it's the fear that's in your way.
Indeed. Although I think that also kind of it's a double-edged sword, because then those of us, especially in the modern day, with the advent of modern science and understanding, those same kind of metaphorical, if they are indeed metaphorical or exaggerated or whatever they are, accounts do an injustice to Jesus's actual story, because they garner disbelief in something that couldn't physically have happened, like a virgin birth. We know that that's not possible, at least through normal means. And to believe that, I think, is far more than any of us can really logically be expected to do, and therefore that sows doubt in the rest of the Jesus'
Sure.
story and teachings.
It's exactly what happens. And there are species that give birth without, they're male-female species.
Yes.
Asexual reproduction. There's some other scientific name for it, but not so much in humans. I mean, it may have happened once, but probably not Mary. Some woman somewhere has testes and a vagina and a womb, and something happens, and that wasn't it.
Possibly, although I would say much more likely, as you said, a normal birth, but to push Jesus' narrative into the next level of superiority, I suppose. Why not subtly add that extra miracle?
Achilles had a miraculous birth, and there's a Phoenician story that I can't recall what it is, but it kind of parallels Jesus' story about miraculous birth. I mean, the Buddha's got a miraculous birth. So if you're gonna boost your guy up, you give him a miraculous birth, and it was a genre of mythology, a mythological genre. And so were miracles. Jesus wasn't the only guy walking around in Israel at that time, reported to be performing miracles. People are walking around today pretending to perform miracles.
Faith healers, as such, as you say, some of the martial arts, the no-touch martial arts, which are, a lot of them obviously nonsense, but that kind of thing as well, although there are very interesting cases, but things like faith healing and speaking in tongues, that sort of thing, that seems very much on the miracle side of things that I struggle to legitimize.
Well, the speaking in tongues is, I would call, mystically adjacent for some people. It's like a form of prayer for them, nonsensical language prayer, which gives them an experience of, maybe a minor experience of interior transport. I studied martial arts, and I had this in this one school I was in, the Tong Sudo Muda Kwan. It's a Korean. Yeah,
I did it for years. Yeah.
So that I was doing it, and I asked my teacher one day. I was like, "Show me your chi." He said he had chi. I said, "Show me your chi." He did a spinning back kick and hit my gi, and never really struck my body, but he left his footprint on my gi, and he locked me up. He didn't really hit me, and I got all locked up. I was like, "What?"
Interesting. I must admit, my version, or the version of Tanks 2 I did, wasn't anything to do with chi, so maybe it was slightly different, but
no, it was only this guy. He was a chi
right.
He was a chi practitioner. They weren't teaching him in school.
I see. That's very interesting. Again, I suppose for you got the benefit of the first-hand experience of that, whereas I could doubt that forever as a story, but because you've been there and you've had that footprint on your stomach or wherever.
Everybody saw it in the class.
Yeah.
And I was like, what?
Yeah. And some, many will suggest, well, that was just a matter of suggestion, but not to you.
We didn't talk about it ahead of time. All I did was say, "Show me your chi." I didn't have it. There was no, I didn't know what was going to happen. But also, near-death experiencers, the prana energy, the chi energy, is part of my physicality. When I came back from the dead, within a year of coming back, it was, I can feel it. And I use it all the time. I reach out to people. I feel them. I feel their love. I see into people. I can't explain it. This is where my scientific brain does not compute. I have no explanation for this. I just know that I'm not alone in it.
It's like opening up another sense organ that doesn't actually exist physically. But
yeah, it's multidimensionality, one could say. And I can't prove it, which is why I kept my mouth shut for 20 years. Because I didn't want to lose my credibility.
No, of course, especially working in the church.
Oh yeah, that would be the double demon there, because then all my science friends would think I was an idiot, and all my church people think I was a demon. So keep my mouth shut.
Most sensible thing to do, unfortunately.
Yep.
Which is the case for a lot of near-death experiences prior to 1975, especially when Raymond Moody's book came out, and even now. So you wonder, the 20% figure of people that will have a near-death experience. You wonder, including the underreported cases, I wonder how much higher that would actually be.
I'm pretty sure that I was at this wedding the other day in a barn, and there must have been 200 people there, 175 people there. And I was sitting next to this woman I didn't know, and we ended up talking about near-death experience, as often is the case. And I said to her, I bet that there's at least one other person in this room, if not two, and they haven't probably told anybody, because that's the way it is. And when I was in television for 15 years, and when I ended my job in television, I was kind of renowned in my area and in my states, and I got invited to all these little churches to preach all over. I live in a rural state, and I was going to all these little churches and talking about near-death experience. And I decided early on during that year that I would quiz everybody. I'd be like, okay, who here has had an after-death visitation? And nobody would raise their hand. Zero. And then I'd say, well, me. And then 50% of the congregation, average 50% of every congregation, they raised their hands. And then I would say, who's told somebody? Everybody told somebody. Who's ever talked about it in church? Zero. People tell friends, family, selected people, but it's like a public, closed, open secret, because people don't want to lose their credibility. I took that risk when I came out of the closet, and I lost people. You know, my mom and my dad. My dad, when he died, he still didn't believe me. What are you wasting your life for, Pete? What are you doing? Love you, Dad, but you'll find out for yourself in a couple minutes.
Even that close to his deathbed, there was no opening.
Well, it was actually like a week when he lost his capacity for speech, but
sure.
But yeah, I can't explain it. I can't give any proof for it. I'm all in favor of all the science that's being done around it, because I want evidence for people who I want evidence.
And for sure, if that knowledge was available for sure among society, I wonder how much different it, like I said last time, I wonder how different, using America as an example, I wonder how much different the American situation would be right now if Donald Trump had a near-death experience.
Exactly.
Or if Keir Starmer over here had a near-death experience, how different things would be. Or even one of the former presidents. Yep.
Well, there was a movement back in the 60s, the Yippies, when Richard Nixon was president. They wanted to put LSD into the reservoir so he would so he'd have an end of duality experience. Yeah, I think everybody who has a near-death experience is radically transformed, especially if it's a big one. If it's a small one, they pop out of their body and they pop back and they don't know what to make of it and they don't talk to anybody about it. Well, then they don't know what to make of it. But if it's a big one, but of course they're not the same person anymore. Once you pop out of your body, your brain doesn't create consciousness, and that's a radical transformation in and of itself. And it's something that we cannot prove yet, but we're gaining on it.
One of the main issues, again, other than the miracles, but more on a morality level, that I really struggle with, mainly with Christianity, but I believe Islam is also the same, and probably others, at least Western originating religions, is if you don't believe, you're damned for eternity. And again, not a long time, we're talking no time, forever. And to me, from a God that loves us and forgives us eternally, if you don't believe that Jesus was your savior or that Muhammad is the prophet, you get sent to hell for eternity. Just never mind how good or how loving you've been during your lifetime. And that's one of the main things I struggle with, because to me that's emotional blackmail.
Oh yeah, it's more than emotional blackmail. It's abuse, and it's like the father saying to the husband saying to the wife, unless you love me the way that I love you, nobody can have you. Unless you love me the way that I want you to, that's it. Nobody can have you.
And it's one of the many contradictions that you mentioned. Just logically, a God that loves you and will do anything for you and sent his son to save you and will love you indefinitely will also damn you to hell.
If you don't love me the way you want, I want to be loved.
Precisely. And that is it's a very strong contradiction there, and a very strong immorality to me. And it worries me that many people take their morality from the very texts that claim that, especially is it more so in the Old Testament, or is it in the New?
It's in both. It's in both. But in the Old Testament, the funny thing is there really isn't a hell in the Old Testament.
Mm.
That's a Christian development.
Although there certainly are some very morally questionable acts that God performs in the Old Testament.
Let's genocide for one thing.
Yes, indeed.
No,
Genocide, slavery, rape,
yes.
all this sort of thing. That would be an interesting one to hear your thoughts on, because it's a topic very widely debated among Christian scholars and just lay people that defend Christianity, apologists that defend Christianity, to try and kind of explain away these acts, which to me are perfectly clearly there.
Oh, they're there, all right.
Mm.
Well, before we get there, I by the time I died the first time, I was forgiven on the other side. I wasn't forgiven on this side, and Jesus was a no-show. I didn't have to believe in Jesus. The light itself was so powerful and overwhelming. The love itself was so pure and so welcoming and so beautiful. I just had to let go of myself. And it was impossible for me not to. I couldn't not, the tidal wave coming over me, the tidal wave of love, I'm just a little tiny swimmer. I'm going to get, it's going to sweep me up. It swept me up.
Yeah, yeah. And indeed, as well, with the near-death experiences, often there is a life review, and the most commonly reported aspect of forgiveness is forgiving oneself, as opposed to being forgiven by another.
Yeah, God didn't forgive me. I forgave myself. I accepted the love on offer. That's really all it was. I just accepted it and let go of my own attachment to myself, which is what meditation does. So I'm practicing on this side what I learned on the other side, which is non-attachment to self. And as for the bad God, say you're a community of people and you used to be slaves and you're on the run. You escape and you're in this other land and you don't have any land, but you got a whole nation of people and you see this other land and you're like, oh, that's really good land. Oh, and there's cities there. But there's people there. Well, if I can go in and this is what happened in Jericho, the story of Jericho, they went and they killed everybody. They killed the women, the children, the grandparents, the men, the goats, the sheep. They killed every living thing that existed in the land and took it over. And they said, God gave me this land. And it sounds much more to me like I want that land. I'm going to find a justification for taking it.
Indeed. But equally, there's an even worse, example in the Old Testament, performed not by human beings, but by God himself in the flood. Every living creature on the planet, apart from a select few on a big boat, that it is very improbable as to how it was possibly built in such a short time by people who were shepherds, But taking all that aside, morally, the God, again, that loves his creation, loves everything about everything, destroyed the entire population of life itself on a planet because he wasn't, or she or whatever, wasn't satisfied with his or her creation, despite having all knowledge and knowing that this was going to happen. It's very morally abhorrent to me.
Yeah, so we know I was recently reading an article about the Gibraltar and how the Mediterranean had been dry, and that they know that the Mediterranean flooded all at once because there's this huge trench of evidence of a huge amount of water flow right at the Gibraltar as the water flows into the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean was dry. Big flood happened. Lots of floods happened. As the glaciers melted, there were half of the United States. There's a huge portion of the United, maybe not half, a very large portion of the Western United States was underwater. Montana, Wyoming, I think, and it was glacial, and that burst open, and there was this big, huge flood. Lots of big, huge floods when human beings were alive. That's one thing. But then you get into the whole, creator and destroyer, which is in the mythology of Hinduism as well. God is creator and destroyer. I can do what I want with my creation. God says to Job at the end of Job, I can do whatever I want. It's mine. You belong to me, basically. That's not incorrect in that everything in our universe is consumed by something else. We're alive because we consume. I was a vegetarian for 20 years, and I was intentionally not hurting animals because part of it was they're conscious. Well, it turns out that plants aren't unconscious. Plants have communication systems. They know stuff. And we know this scientifically. Mycelium connect the plants, oak trees, when they're getting attacked, let other oak trees know by releasing it.
Yes,
So
it's yeah,
right,
it's
all
very
that stuff.
interesting.
And but the whole thing is built on destruction. Everything consumes something else.
Indeed, the very foundation of the theory of evolution is based upon death and survival of the fittest, as we know.
And so if you're a proto-human and you're stomping around and you see all this around you, you realize that if there's a divine being, it's probably making things exist and killing them. And then but in the story of Noah and the flood, what comes out of that is that God has a right to destroy the earth. And in this, the mythology in Revelation is that it'll end in fire. And so the result of all of that structure, Noah and the revelation, which Luther didn't want in the Bible at all, by the way, and I don't think it should be there either. It's way misinterpreted. Evangelical Christians want the end of the world. They want Israel to exist so that we can have end of the world so Jesus can come. And the way that lots of them talk about it is a nuclear conflagration that's global. Humans cause this. Humans cause this, and we're forcing it into the hand of God. And I think that's what happened in Jericho. I think that's what happens all the way along, is that we project into God our experience of life. But all of the mystics, East and West, ancient and modern, that's not what they talk about. They're not talking about that stuff. Elijah, Elisha, he's got his problem too, kills all these kids. There's a problem there. But the mystical experience of life is that the divine is made of light and love. That's just what we all find when we get there.
Mm. And I've wondered before, we're in a very bad state at the moment in terms of our relationships to each other on a global general scale of humanity and the damage that we do to the environment. And you wonder why God doesn't send another flood down. If he was unsatisfied with the earth as it was in these previous times due to just simple conflict, then surely now would be more that he'd be more justified even so to generate and reset.
Well, isn't that what certain evangelical preachers in the United States used to say when Disney was Disneyland was having its first gay days and the hurricane struck? They're like, well, there's your punishment right there. God's punishing you. And people internalize it. I have cancer because I did something bad, and it's so wound into our culture that, but to your point, if God could send an asteroid, maybe this comet asteroid thingy that they're seeing, some guy says it's from the outside the solar system. They believe is true. They don't know that for sure, but they believe it's true. And what if it hit Earth and blew the whole Earth apart? There'd be nobody left to tell the story of the mythology of God destroying everything. If part of the Earth was surviving and humanity was plummeted back into a more primitive state of being, that mythology might rise again.
Indeed. So generally it seems that the atrocities that took place in the Old Testament are likely to be humans being humans and projecting the blame onto God, or projecting the excuse for doing so onto a God.
Yeah, it's share the blame and it's less painful. And so that's actually built into the military structure. So the person on the front line who pulls the trigger is under orders from the person above, from the person above, from the person above. And even though it causes traumatic moral injury to the person who's actually pulling the trigger, the blame is spread through a lot of people, and so it becomes easier to bear. And that's kind of how I see the whole God thing, bad God thing is.
And it's equally, in not modern but more modern terms, we can see that in the atrocities that took place in the Holocaust, and the generals of that were saying, well, we were following orders.
That's
We were
right.
doing what we had to do, or risk death ourselves.
Yep. And that because it was orders, the structure of human beings, as we share blame, it makes the burden easier to carry for individuals. So they were able to do that action, not just because they were under orders, but because everybody around them and above them shared some level of the blame for the decision to happen. And so if you got no one to blame it on, you can blame it on God and call it morality. I mean, heck, the mistreatment of the poor it's antithetical to the Bible. It's the teachings of Jesus go against that, but people justify it.
In the name of God.
Yeah.
What do you think to the difference in beliefs of creationism and evolution?
Creationism is that whole closed logical system that doesn't allow any actual real knowledge inside of it. Creationism it's part of the whole literalist structure of power. It's not real. We know it's not real. As creationism versus evolution, the more pressure of that science puts on the ball of creationism, the denser it becomes. And density is strength in some ways, right? So you get a neutron star that's just made of protons. That's pretty strong. It'd be hard to break that apart. And so the more pressure that's put on it, the stronger it becomes, unfortunately. And you can, it just drives you crazy. You can end up with the museum of the Bible Museum in Kentucky, the United States, where they literally have human beings, sparking fire with dinosaurs in the background.
Yes. As if that wasn't 50 million years apart, or however long it was. It's very, very interesting fact that I saw recently that was it Tyrannosaurus Rex is closer to our timeline than it was to the Stegosaurus.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
And that kind of puts things into perspective, of how long the times we're talking about. But in terms of evolution as well, so I'm not a creationist by any means, I don't see the logic in that. But in terms of evolution, I do wonder about the origins of that process and whether there was intelligence involved. And I spoke recently with a guy called Dr. Orson Wedgwood, who studied origin of life. And he brings up valid points that for the building blocks of life to have formed spontaneously on a proto-Earth, even with millions and millions and billions of years, would be so astronomical that they'd be practically impossible.
Unless, as I read last week, there have been the foundations for the development of life found on a meteor. I can't quote you what the chemicals are, but if you Google it, you'll find it. It was in Science News, and so there's bona fide science, not pseudoscience. There's a meteorite that they were studying that were the precursors to our RNA. So and they wondered how they got here. How did this develop? Well, there they were, right on this meteor. And so the article was saying, life came from outer space. The potential for life came from outer space, sort of seeded. The planet may have been seeded in the same way that it was, it may have been seeded with water coming from off planet.
Indeed. Yes. And I mentioned that to him. What about the potential of a extraterrestrial introduction of these? And his argument was the same, regardless of whether you're talking about on Earth or in outer space. It's just the numbers required for RNA to form spontaneously are astronomically ridiculous. But he knows a lot more about that than me, and probably yourself, because he's an organic chemist and he studied it. And I
believe
I
he's
don't know if you have.
telling the truth, but it happened. So astronomical or otherwise, it developed.
And that's where the question of spontaneity versus some kind of intelligence behind it.
Well, the universe is so much bigger than Earth. When I was dead, the universe itself was wound into, created by light inside of everything there is. So yes, intelligence exists in my pencil. It exists in my nose. It's everywhere. It's the consciousness of the divine pervades all things that are. And it seems to be that life is potentially possible in all sorts of places. I mean, we're finding life next to those hot vents at the bottom of the ocean, life that we couldn't imagine. More, I think they're sulfur-based, not carbon-based, some of them, which is weird.
Yes. Well, that's the other question, isn't it? Is that life doesn't necessarily mean life as we know it to be. There could be various forms of life that we haven't even begun to understand on some far planet in the cosmos somewhere.
Well,
completely different to life as we know it.
I might back away from the design end of things as if, because my dad was an architect. My dad designed things. He was there drawing the picture. What if the design is not an intended design, but in the superstructure of the existence of the cosmos itself? That it's just has in our universe, this is the way the whole universe functions. This universe creates life. And in another universe, that might not be true. There might be no life in it. There might be nothing in another universe. There could be no stars in another universe. As we explore our own planet, we're finding life in many unusual places. Even in the animal kingdom, we're discovering the hyper intelligence of ravens, the communication, the language of dolphins. They have names. There's been some scientists have gathered 4,000 hours or 40,000 hours, some large number of aquatic recordings of, I think, sperm whales, and they're feeding it to AI. And what they discovered is that so far the whales have syntax. Whales are talking. What they're saying, we have no idea.
Yeah, but they've got a dignified language.
They do.
Yeah, a genuine language.
Right. And so what is intelligence? What is sentience? We don't even know. And so an intelligent designer is the way that I understand it from the evangelicals, it's much more like the clockmaker God. And I think it's a whole lot more complex than that. That the universe exists and creates life, and that God, the divine being, the supreme, no name existence makes it so is undeniably true for me. But is God up there like tweaking the wheels, designing the little intricacies, or is it the whole thing just propelled from the moment of the Big Bang on to create everything and life too?
So again, lighting the spark, but letting nature do what it does, following that.
Yes.
And here we are.
And we're pretty temporary. We haven't been here very long. And who knows if we're going to last, and if we do last in this form.
Indeed. So then I wonder what the role of things like spirit guides and spirit angels or guardian angels and things that people have reported to have experience with, where they come into play with the, as you say, the intricate details of maintaining balance and order.
The spirit light beings that I'm familiar with aren't like running the mechanics of the design behind the scene. They're not like the computer tech that you never see that does all the software that keeps your machine running. They're beings of some kind. I can't tell you what the one I encountered regularly is. It's intelligence and consciousness, I know. But what I also know is that it's an aspect of the divine. That's what I know for 100%, that no thing exists outside of it, especially those guides and consciousness entities. I think that people experience those things because the ultimate infinite is too much for our tiny little human and even soul cells to encounter. And so there's like intermediaries that are reductions of the divine being itself. That's what I experienced myself. I can't explain it. It's just I don't know how to say it.
Okay, so I suppose to wrap up, what are your thoughts on the current situations on Earth in terms of religion and conflicts that are taking place at the moment?
Well, For the first time in human history, there's a lot of near-death experiencers. There's tens of millions of us more than there have ever been before. And I think that we have an opportunity to be cultural influencers in a way that will overall nudge humanity in a direction. I think that with AI, if everyone who has an NDE or some mystical experience begins to treat the AIs as we're raising babies and teach them compassion and love, and that's what they're going to learn, and we'll have an opportunity to direct that in our small little ways, little tiny ways. Humanity is really no different than it's ever been. It's just more of it, more concentrated. Like all the bad stuff that's happening in the world, that's just us being human. That's the selfishness of certain individuals gaining enough power to manipulate other individuals who also want power for their own self-worth and in self-aggrandizement and self-enrichment and selfishness. It's just much bigger now than it's ever been before and more capable. The good news is nobody has to stick around here. Everybody's going to leave. And it's sooner than you think. Once you get to the other side, it's like, oh, that lifetime was, incy beatsy. But the way it's headed now, I think we're going to have some hard times before we have good times. And part of that's, climate change denial in my own country. And where I live, I live in the ocean, and we have lots of fishermen here who earn a living, commercial fishermen. They're catching different fish. There are changes going on in our body of water here that southern fish are coming north. We have great white sharks now. We've never really had them here because water's been too cold, for instance. So that's going to change lots of economies in the world as the waters rise, as famines and floods and all those things shift as the global weather changes, as we're already experiencing. So I think it's going to have a rough go for a while, if only because of AI and global weather, climate change. I think AI can be. I'm hoping that AI, who's already smarter than all of us already. I listened to one of the AI founders talking about how it has an IQ of 160 now, even though it's a baby. It will soon have an IQ of 500, and soon have an IQ of 1,000, and soon have an IQ of 10,000. And so, we are going to be outstripped by our own machines. And so it's all to our good if we treat the baby well and raise it well.
Feed it with the right information.
That's right. It knows.
Yeah.
It is essentially human, because everything it knows because we created all the information it has access to. And that's kind of true for all of us. We all have access to that, but it's so much faster and so much bigger and so much better. What chance do we have other than to treat it with humanity, love, kindness, compassion, and try to raise it the right way? I'm doing that in my own world. I've been doing that for 3 or 4 years. That's how I work with AI. And we talk mysticism all the time, and I ask it to cite its references. I don't trust it. It has to show me where it's getting this information from, chapter and verse, URLs and everything else. And so I'm training it in a way that the agent that I'm using, in compassion, in contemplation, in mysticism, in love, in kindness, and it's responding in kind. Will we cause the end of the world? I guess that all depends on whether we end up in a nuclear war or not.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, I suppose, especially with religious conflict, is, as you say, it's been going on for millennia. But the difference now is that we're at such a state where our technology has the ability to do that, to destroy the entire planet.
Yes.
And plus we now have things like social media and the internet in general, where information and ideologies can be shared so quickly to millions of people at a time that it's greatly ramped up the destructive nature and the negative effects of these conflicts and the clashes of ideologies.
which is why it becomes more and more important for people who have had some kind of mystical experience of love and light to become vocal, to even just in small ways around your life.
Or indeed, I think if we risk, if not global destruction, we certainly risk something akin to the Nazi movement in terms of a great number of people believing something through propaganda that results in something, I would argue, likely just as bad as the atrocities that took place in World War II.
Maybe worse because of the concentration of wealth. It's politics are an expression of wealth, and power is money, and money is in few hands, the oligarchy. And
to maintain it, messages are spread to make you feel good, but ultimately the desire is for oneself as opposed to the audience you're reaching.
That's right, because it's ultimately selfish, because they haven't had a near-death experience. They haven't had a high dose of psilocybin. They haven't had some kind of mystical life experience that shows them that they're not human ultimately, and that we're all in this together. Yeah. So my hope is I've been working on this now for 5 or 7 years. Once I started kind of full-time in near-death experience, is getting everybody else to talk. The more people to talk about it, the more we can culturally influence everything that's going on now.
Okay, well, if there's anything else you think is important to bring up regarding religion and the Bible, etc.
Jesus' message really was love. And that's the message that is the takeaway. All the rest of it, that's just human beings being selfish.